In your own home, the one you poured your blood, sweat, and soul into, only to hear your father's voice, cold as a Victoria winter, spitting venom through a phone he didn't hang up. She's a burden, he snarls, like I'm some useless weight crushing his dreams. A burden? Me? The one who paid every hydro bill, every tax, every repair while they waltzed in, stole my space, and trampled my life like it was theirs to own? They didn't just betray me, they gutted me, ripped out my heart, and left it bleeding on the floor of the house I fought for. The pain? It's a knife twisted so deep I can barely breathe. Feel that fury? That raw, searing wound? I did. And I swore they'd pay. And this is how I clawed back what was mine. The sting of my father's words still burns in my chest, but let me take you back to where this all began. I'm standing in a century-old house on a quiet street in Fairfield, Victoria, British Columbia, a two-story cedar-shingled beauty worth 1.2 million Canadian dollars, with a rose garden out front and a view of Juan de Fuca Strait that catches your breath. This was my grandmother Eleanor's home, her sanctuary, and she left it to me. I'm Abigail Harper, 34 years old, a former Canadian Forces medic who carried a shoulder injury and a stack of commendations from 8 years of service. I came back to Victoria 2 years ago, chasing the kind of peace you only find in a place where seagulls outnumber stoplights. The house was my fresh start, a promise Eleanor made when my parents skipped my basic training graduation in Chilliwack. This house is yours, Abby, she'd said, her voice firm over a cup of Earl Grey. They'll never understand what you've carried. Eleanor saw me when no one else did. When I got my medic certification, my dad, Douglas, texted back, "Don't get too cocky." My mom, Margaret, didn't even reply. But Eleanor sent me a handwritten card, tucked inside a Tim Hortons gift card for old time's sake. When she passed away 3 weeks before I left the forces, her lawyer called. "It's yours," he said. "The house on Dallas Road. No strings." I moved in, expecting quiet mornings with coffee and the hum of the ocean. That lasted exactly 10 days. Then my phone rang. "Abby, your dad's hours got cut at the shipyard," Margaret said, her voice a mix of guilt and demand. "We need a place to crash. Just for a bit." I said yes, thinking 2 months, max. Big mistake. They rolled up in a U-Haul packed to the roof, like they were moving in for good. Douglas claimed the leather recliner in the living room, saying it was better for his back. Margaret started rearranging my spice rack, muttering about how my time was past its prime. They didn't ask. They just took. And I let them, telling myself it was temporary. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't about a rough patch. This was about them claiming what was never theirs. I thought I could handle my parents moving into my house in Fairfield, Victoria. I told myself it was temporary, a small price to pay for family. But within weeks, Douglas and Margaret Harper turned my sanctuary into their personal fiefdom. It wasn't just about them taking up space, it was about them erasing me from my own home, inch by inch, like I was a tenant in Eleanor's legacy. The first sign came when I walked into the kitchen one morning, expecting the familiar scent of my coffee brewing, and found Margaret had tossed my locally roasted beans from Habit Coffee. "Too bitter," she declared, replacing them with a tin of Folgers she'd bought at Save On Foods. My spices, neatly labeled in jars, were shoved into a drawer, swapped for her plastic containers marked oregano and generic curry. She didn't ask. She just decided my kitchen, my rules, my life were up for grabs. Douglas was worse. He claimed the living room like a king staking out a throne, sprawling across Eleanor's leather recliner with his tablet, muttering about his sciatica while streaming curling matches at full volume. One evening, I found him measuring the bay window for new curtains. "These ones are too old-fashioned," he said, pointing at the linen drapes Eleanor had chosen. "We're thinking blackout shades. More modern." "We?" I hadn't been consulted. I bit my tongue, telling myself it wasn't worth a fight. But then I noticed the mail. A stack of envelopes addressed to Douglas Harper, resident, 1245 Dallas Road. Mortgage offers, home renovation catalogs, even a flyer for a local contractor offering free quotes for your dream home. My stomach churned. This wasn't their house. It was mine, paid for with my savings, my name on the deed, my heart tied to every creaky floorboard. I confronted him that night. "Dad, why's your name on these?" I held up the stack, my voice steady but sharp. He shrugged, not even looking up from his tablet. "It's our family home, Abby." "Makes sense." "Family home?" The words landed like a slap. This wasn't their family home. It was Eleanor's gift to me, a promise they'd never understood. The takeover didn't stop there. Margaret started hosting her book club in my dining room, serving tea in Eleanor's bone china like she'd inherited it herself. I overheard her telling her friend Susan, "Oh, we're sprucing up the place. Abby's too busy to maintain it properly." Too busy. I was the one paying the $3,000 property tax bill, the $1,200 hydro repair after a storm knocked out power, and the $500 to fix the furnace Douglas insisted was fine. I swallowed my anger, smiled through their complaints about my cluttered office, and kept quiet when they moved my framed Forces commendation to the guest hallway, replacing it with a thrift store painting of a lighthouse. But the breaking point was brewing. One afternoon, I went to the garage to grab my toolbox for a loose porch railing. Tucked behind a box of Margaret's knitting supplies, I found a folder labeled Home Equity Options. Inside were loan applications, all in Douglas's name, listing my house as collateral. My house. The one I'd paid for, maintained, loved. My hands shook as I read the numbers. $500,000 loan, 4.5% interest, 20-year term. They hadn't just moved in. They were planning to mortgage my life out from under me. I stood there, surrounded by the damp smell of the garage, my heart pounding like I was back in a field hospital, triaging chaos. "You okay, Abby?" Margaret called from the kitchen, her voice syrupy with false concern. I didn't answer. I shoved the folder back, walked inside, and forced a smile. "Just looking for a wrench," I said, my voice tight. She didn't notice. She was too busy rearranging my cutlery drawer to match her system. That night, I sat on the porch, staring at the rose garden Eleanor had tended, the one I'd promised to keep alive. The petals were wilting under a late spring drizzle, mirroring the ache in my chest. I thought of Eleanor's words, "They'll never understand what you've carried." She'd known. She'd seen their need to control, their refusal to see me as anything but a means to an end. And now, they were rewriting my story, claiming my home as their own, while I paid for their audacity. The anger wasn't just a spark anymore, it was a fire, and it was about to burn. The fire of my anger was burning, but it hadn't yet consumed the part of me that still hoped Douglas and Margaret might see me, really see me, as more than a means to their ends. I was wrong. The house on Dallas Road, Victoria, wasn't just Eleanor's legacy, it was my anchor, the one place where I could still hear her voice in the creak of the cedar floors. But my parents were stripping it away, piece by piece, and with it, the last threads of who I thought I was to them. One rainy afternoon, I climbed to the attic, needing to feel close to Eleanor, to something solid. I opened her old cedar chest, the one that still smelled of lavender and thyme. Inside, beneath a pile of quilted table runners, I found a letter, yellowed and brittle, sealed with my name in her careful script, "For Abigail, when you're ready." My hands trembled as I opened it, the paper crackling like it knew the weight it carried. "My dearest Abby," it began, "your parents love control more than they love people. They tried to convince me to sell this house when my health failed, saying it was too much for me. I refused because I knew it was meant for you, not them. You're not their burden. You're their storm, and they'll never tame you." I sat on the attic floor, the rain drumming against the skylight, and felt my chest cave in. Eleanor had known. She'd seen their greed years ago, their need to possess what wasn't theirs. The letter wasn't just a warning, it was a wound, proof that my parents' betrayal wasn't new, it was a pattern, etched deep before I'd even come home. I clutched the paper, tears blurring her words, and remembered a moment from when I was 12. I'd spilled cranberry juice on Eleanor's favorite rug, and Douglas had yelled, Can't you do anything right? Margaret just stood there, silent, as I scrubbed the stain alone. That memory clawed at me now, sharper than ever, because I was still that kid, trying to prove I was enough in a house that was mine. The pain deepened that evening when Margaret hosted her bridge club in my dining room. I was upstairs, folding laundry, trying to block out the clink of teacups and their laughter. Then I heard her voice, clear through the vent, slicing like a blade. Abigail's struggling to keep up with this place, she told her friends, her tone dripping with pity. It's a lot for her, you know, being so young and single. We're stepping in to help manage it. Manage it? I was the one paying the $1,500 monthly hydro and gas, the $4,000 annual property taxes, the $800 plumber's bill when the pipes froze last winter. I gripped the edge of my bed, my knuckles white, the air in my lungs turning to lead. They weren't just taking my space, they were rewriting my story, painting me as a failure to their West Shore social circle, while they sipped tea in my home. I slipped downstairs, unnoticed, and stood in the hallway, listening as Margaret continued. It's really our family's house, she said, her voice smug. Eleanor would have wanted us to take care of it. The lie hit like a punch to the gut. Eleanor's letter was still in my pocket, her words screaming the truth they ignored. I wanted to storm in, to scream that this was my house, my life, my blood on the line. But I didn't. I walked out to the rose garden, the one Eleanor had planted with her own hands, now wilting under the weight of neglect. The drizzle soaked my jacket, but I didn't care. I stood there, staring at the ocean beyond Juan de Fuca Strait, and felt something break, not just anger, but hope. Hope that they'd ever see me as their daughter, not a problem to solve. The pain was raw, deeper than any wound I'd carried from my years in the forces. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure, like I was a ghost in my own home, haunting a life they'd claimed as theirs. I whispered to the roses, to Eleanor, I'm not done yet. And in that moment, under the gray Victoria sky, I knew I'd fight back, not with shouts, but with something sharper, something they'd never see coming. The rain had stopped, but the ache in my chest hadn't. Eleanor's letter, tucked in my pocket, felt like a grenade, its words exploding every illusion I'd clung to about family. I'd stood in that rose garden, whispering promises to her memory, but the fire inside me was no longer just pain, it was resolve. I wasn't ready to let Douglas and Margaret Harper rewrite my life. Not in this house, not on Dallas Road, Victoria, where every corner held Eleanor's love. But I didn't know how deep their betrayal ran until a single moment flipped my world upside down. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of gray, drizzly day that makes Victoria feel like it's holding its breath. I was in my office, a small room at the back of the house, sorting through receipts for the $2,500 roof repair I'd paid for after last month's storm. My phone was on the desk, charging, when it buzzed with an incoming call from Douglas. I didn't pick up. I was too tired, too raw from Margaret's lies at her bridge club, from the weight of Eleanor's letter. The call went to voicemail, but he didn't hang up. I froze when I heard his voice, low and careless, like he was chatting over a pint at the bent mast. She's getting nosy, Margaret, he said, his tone sharp with irritation. Abigail's asking about taxes, poking around the garage. We need to move faster. My heart stopped. Move faster? I leaned closer, my breath shallow, as Margaret's voice cut in, crisp and cold. She's too stubborn, Douglas. Thinks she's got a claim because of Eleanor's will. But once she signs the title over, it's ours. She'll cave. She always does. I gripped the edge of my desk, the wood biting into my palms. Then came the knife. She's just a burden, Douglas said, his voice flat, like he was stating the weather. Always has been. If it weren't for us, she'd have nothing. Margaret laughed, a short, bitter sound. Eleanor made a mistake leaving her that house. We're fixing it. My vision blurred, not with tears, but with a rage so fierce it felt like my blood was boiling. A burden. The word echoed, slicing deeper than any mortar blast I'd faced in the forces. I'd carried stretchers under fire, paid every bill for this house, $1,800 for the new water heater, $600 for the gutter cleaning Douglas called unnecessary, and they dared call me a burden? I hit record on my phone, capturing every damning word, my hands steady despite the storm inside. The call ended when they finally realized the line was live, but it was too late. I had it all. I sat there, staring at the screen, the timestamp glowing, 7:42 p.m., March 17, 2025. My military training kicked in: compartmentalize, strategize, survive. I uploaded the audio to a secure cloud drive, then sent a copy to Chloe Bennett, my old medic buddy turned lawyer in Nanaimo. "Chloe," I texted, "I need you. It's bad." She called back in 10 minutes, her voice calm but urgent. "Abby, send me everything. Deed, will, that audio. I'll review it tonight." I didn't sleep that night. I paced the office, Eleanor's letter still in my pocket, her words, "You're there storm," looping in my head. I opened my laptop and pulled up the property records for 1245 Dallas Road. My name was there, clear as day, sole owner, no co-signers, valued at 1.2 million Canadian dollars. But Douglas and Margaret were betting on my silence, my need for their approval, to steal it. I remembered a moment from my deployment in Kandahar, when a sergeant told me, "You don't win by fighting louder. You win by fighting smarter." That's what I'd do. I saved the audio again, on a USB drive labeled Proof, and hid it in a lockbox under my bed, next to Eleanor's old forces badge she'd given me. "You okay, Abby?" Margaret called from downstairs, her voice syrupy as she polished Eleanor's silver candlesticks. I didn't answer. I just locked my office door and stared out at the Juan de Fuca Strait, the waves crashing like they were cheering me on. This wasn't just a house they were stealing. It was my life, my legacy, my fight. And I was done playing nice. The audio file labeled Proof was my weapon, locked away in a safe under my bed, next to Eleanor's forces badge. Douglas and Margaret Harper thought they could erase me from my own home on Dallas Road, Victoria, but that recording, their cold voices calling me a burden, plotting to steal my house, was the spark that turned my pain into power. I wasn't just fighting for a 1.2 million Canadian dollars cedar shingled house, I was fighting for the life Eleanor entrusted to me. I'd spent years in the Canadian forces learning to face threats head-on, and this was no different. It was time to confront them, not with screams, but with the kind of precision that cuts deeper than anger. I chose neutral ground, the Parsonage, a cozy cafe in Victoria's Fernwood neighborhood, where the smell of fresh scones and espresso couldn't soften the truth I was about to deliver. I booked a corner booth, arrived 10 minutes early, and set a small Bluetooth speaker on the table. My hands were steady, but my heart pounded like I was back in a field hospital, waiting for the next crisis. Douglas and Margaret walked in at exactly 2 p.m., March 18, 2025, right on time, which was unlike them. Douglas wore his usual golf jacket, trying to look relaxed, like he was here to discuss the weather over a Tim Hortons double-double. Margaret clutched her purse, her pearls gleaming under the cafe's warm lights, her face set in that practiced smile she used at church luncheons. I didn't stand to greet them. "Sit," I said, my voice flat, pointing to the booth. They exchanged a glance, then sat, Margaret smoothing her skirt like this was a social call. "Abby, what's this about?" Douglas asked, leaning back, his tone carrying that fatherly condescension I'd heard my whole life. I didn't answer. I pressed play on the speaker. Their voices filled the air, scratchy but unmistakable. "She's getting nosy, Margaret. We need to move faster." Then Margaret, "She's too stubborn. Thinks she's got a claim because of Eleanor's will." And Douglas, cold as ice, "She's just a burden. Always has been." The cafe's hum faded. Their faces froze, eyes wide, like deer caught in headlights on a Vancouver Island backroad. Margaret recovered first, adjusting her pearls, her voice tight. "Abby, you're taking this out of context. We were just venting." I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers. "There's no context where calling your daughter a burden while plotting to steal her home is okay." Douglas shifted, his jaw tight. "We didn't mean it like that. You're blowing this out of proportion." I held up a hand, cutting him off. I paid every bill for that house. The $3,000 property taxes, the $1,800 water heater, the $2,500 roof repair. My name's on the deed. And you thought you could sign it away? Margaret's smile faltered, her fingers twitching on her purse. We were trying to help, Abby. That house is too much for you. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that made the barista glance over. Help? You moved in, rearranged my life, and lied to your friends that I couldn't handle it. And now this. I tapped the speaker, the audio still loaded, ready to play again. Douglas leaned in, his voice low, like he was negotiating a used car deal. We're family, Abby. We've been here for you. You can't just, I cut him off again. I already did. The house is sold. To a young couple who'll actually respect it. Your stuff's in a storage unit, prepaid for 3 months. You're out. Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her chest. You sold Eleanor's house? Without telling us? Her voice cracked, but I didn't flinch. It's my house. Eleanor left it to me. Not you. And I'm done letting you walk over me. Douglas's face reddened, his hands balling into fists. This is ridiculous. You can't kick us out. We'll fight this. I pulled a USB drive from my pocket, labeled proof, and slid it across the table. Take it to a lawyer. Chloe Bennett, my friend in Nanaimo, already has a copy. She says you've got no claim. None. The air between us was thick, like the fog rolling off Juan de Fuca Strait. Margaret stared at the USB, her lips trembling, but she didn't reach for it. Douglas just sat there, silent, his control slipping like sand through his fingers. I stood, leaving the speaker on the table. You have until tomorrow to pick up your things, I said, my voice steady as steel. After that, the locks change. I walked out, the cafe door chiming behind me, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight lift, like I'd finally exhaled. Walking out of the parsonage, the Victoria air felt lighter, like the fog lifting off Juan de Fuca Strait. I'd left Douglas and Margaret Harper speechless, their betrayal exposed by their own voices on that damning recording. But exposing them wasn't enough. I needed to reclaim my life, my home, my peace, Eleanor's legacy, without raising my voice or breaking a single dish. My years in the Canadian Forces taught me that the best victories are quiet, precise, and final. I drove back to the house on Dallas Road, my heart steady, my mind sharp, like I was planning a field extraction with nothing but a radio and a deadline. The plan was already in motion, and it was as clean as a surgical strike. By the time Douglas and Margaret realized what I'd done, it would be over, and I'd be gone. First, I contacted Chloe Bennett, my lawyer friend in Nanaimo, who'd already reviewed the deed and the audio. It's airtight, Abby, she said over the phone, her voice steady as ever. The house is yours. They've got no claim. Want to move forward? I didn't hesitate. Do it. Sell it. Quietly. Chloe connected me with a discreet realtor, Liam Patel, who specialized in off-market sales in Victoria. Liam didn't ask questions, he just sent an email, property's a gem. I've got a buyer. All cash offer, 1.15 million Canadian dollars, 30-day escrow. You in? I was in. The buyers were a young couple, teachers from Saanich, looking for a fresh start. They didn't need to know the war zone this house had become. I scheduled their walkthrough for the next day, when I knew Douglas and Margaret would be out at their weekly bridge game in Oak Bay. Then came the logistics. I rented a storage unit in Colwood, 10 kilometers west, under Douglas and Margaret's names, prepaid for 3 months at $450. I spent the night packing their belongings, Margaret's knitting supplies, Douglas's golf magazines, their mismatched mugs from thrift stores. I didn't toss anything or mutter a single curse. I folded, labeled, and taped each box with the precision of a Forces inventory check, red for essentials, blue for fragile, green for sentimental. In the box marked Douglas and Margaret, essentials, I slipped an envelope with the storage key and a note, written in my neatest script, surprise. A burden took care of this. Good luck. It wasn't petty, it was poetic. I moved the boxes to the garage under cover of darkness, the cedar-shingled house silent except for the hum of the ocean. By dawn, the living room looked like mine again, Eleanor's linen drapes back in place, my forces commendation rehung above the fireplace. Next, I secured my future. At a CIBC branch in downtown Victoria, I opened a new account under my name, transferring the $1,200 left in my savings and setting up a direct deposit for the house sale proceeds. I drove to Sooke, a quiet coastal town 40 kilometers away, where I'd found a 2-acre cabin listed for $650,000 Canadian dollars. It was small, with a slanted roof and a view of the Pacific, nothing like the grandeur of Dallas Road but everything like freedom. I signed the lease-to-own agreement with cash from my forces pension, my hands steady as I handed over the $5,000 deposit. The realtor, a gruff woman named Tara, raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this? It's remote." I nodded. Exactly. I didn't need neighbors. I needed space. Back at the house, I kept up the act. When Margaret complained about the messy rose garden, I smiled and said, "I'll get to it." When Douglas rambled about installing a new deck for $10,000, I nodded, letting him dream while I dismantled their world. The buyer's walkthrough went smoothly. The couple loved the house, calling it peaceful. I didn't tell them it had been a battlefield. Liam emailed me that evening, offer accepted. Closing in 30 days. I backed up every document, deed, sale contract, audio file, on a second USB drive and stored it in my lockbox, next to Eleanor's badge. As I locked it, I heard Margaret humming in the kitchen, polishing her silver teapot like she owned the place. Douglas was outside, measuring the backyard for his imaginary deck. They had no idea the ground beneath them was already gone. I stood on the porch, the salt air sharp in my lungs, and felt something new, not anger, not pain, but power. I'd outmaneuvered them, not with a fight, but with silence so sharp it cut. The house was sold, their things were packed, and I was already halfway to Sooke, to a life they couldn't touch. The boxes were packed, the house on Dallas Road was sold, and the keys to my new life in Sooke were in my pocket. Douglas and Margaret Harper were out of my home, their belongings stacked neatly in a Coalwood storage unit, their audacity exposed by their own words on that recorded call. I stood on the porch of my new cabin, a modest 2-acre sanctuary 40 kilometers from Victoria, the Pacific Ocean stretching before me like a promise of peace. The salt air filled my lungs, and for the first time in months, I wasn't bracing for a fight. But this story isn't just about me, Abigail Harper, taking back what was mine. It's about you, yes, you, watching this right now. Maybe you felt that same gut punch of betrayal, that sting of being called a burden by the people who should lift you up. Maybe you've smiled through family dinners while they chipped away at your worth, claiming what you built as their own. I see you. And I'm here to tell you, you don't have to stay silent. If you've ever had someone, family, friends, anyone, walk over your boundaries like they were nothing, I want you to pause this video and drop a comment below. Tell me your story. Where are you watching from? Victoria? Vancouver? Somewhere across the prairies? Share that moment when you realized you were done letting others define you. I read every single one, because we're not alone in this. You're not alone. And if this story hit a nerve, if it made your heart race or your fists clench, hit that subscribe button. Join this community, because I'm not done telling stories that burn slow and hit deep, stories of quiet revenge, of reclaiming your space, of building a life that's yours. You deserve to hear them. You deserve to live them. I stood up to Douglas and Margaret not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I refused to let their lies erase me. That house, worth 1.2 million Canadian dollars, was Eleanor's gift, my anchor, and they tried to steal it with words sharper than any knife. But I fought back, quietly, strategically, with a plan as precise as a force's mission. And you can too. Maybe it's not about selling a house or confronting your parents in a Fernwood cafe. Maybe it's saying no to a family member who takes more than they give. Maybe it's walking away from a relationship that demands your silence. Whatever it is, you have the right to draw that line. Abby, a friend once told me over coffee at Murchie's, you don't owe anyone your peace. She was right. And you don't owe it either. So, take that first step. Comment below. Share your story. Let it out. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, who's stuck in a house, a job, a life where they're made to feel small, send them this video. Tag them. Tell them they're not a burden, they're a force. Subscribe, because we're building something here, a space where we talk about the fights that matter, the ones that don't need shouting to win. I'm Abigail Harper, and I'm not just telling my story. I'm telling you that you can write your own. Let's do this together. Hit that button, drop that comment, and let's keep this fire burning. The cedar-shingled house on Dallas Road was gone, sold for $1.15 million Canadian dollars to a young couple who'd fill it with laughter instead of lies. Douglas and Margaret Harper were out, their belongings packed into a Colwood storage unit, their betrayal sealed in an envelope with my note, "A burden took care of this." I stood on the porch of my new cabin in Sooke, 40 kilometers from Victoria, the Pacific Ocean stretching out like a canvas of quiet possibility. The cabin wasn't grand, just a 2-acre lot with a slanted roof, a creaky porch, and a wood stove that flickered like Eleanor's spirit. But it was mine, bought with the $650,000 from my force's pension and the house sale, a space where no one could call me a burden. I'd left behind the weight of their words, the sting of their greed, and found something new, sovereignty. I didn't just walk away from that house, I walked towards something bigger. In Sooke, I started a group called Maple Shield, a weekly meetup at the local library for women veterans like me, women who'd been told they were too much or not enough. We met every Thursday, sharing coffee from serious coffee and stories of battles fought, some overseas, some in our own homes. One woman, a former Navy officer, admitted she'd never checked her own bank account, her ex-husband had controlled it all. Another, a reservist from Port Alberni, whispered, "I don't know how to say no to my family." I didn't have all the answers, but I shared what I'd learned. Lesson 1. Protect your assets. Get your name on the deed, check your will, store your documents in a fireproof safe, not a drawer where someone can rewrite your story. Lesson 2. Set boundaries. Say no, even when it feels like betraying family, because your peace isn't their property. Lesson 3. Build your people. Find a Chloe Bennett, a friend who'll have your back when the world doesn't. I handed out binders, budgets, legal contacts, estate checklists, free at the community center, and they vanished faster than Timbits at a hockey game. This cabin, with its $200 solar panel setup and a view of the ocean, isn't just a home, it's a declaration. I'm Abigail Harper, and I'm not the burden Douglas and Margaret tried to make me. I'm the storm Eleanor always saw. If you've been where I was, smiling through pain, swallowing silence to keep the peace, know this, you can walk away. You can choose yourself. It's not selfish, it's survival. So, here's my ask, quiet and real, like a whisper over this Sooke shoreline. If this story moved you, if it stirred something deep, drop a like. It's not just a button, it's a nod to every fight you've won in silence. Leave a comment, tell me what you've reclaimed, what line you've drawn. And if you want more stories of courage that don't scream but burn, subscribe to True North Courage. This channel's for us, the ones who rebuild, quietly, fiercely, on our own terms. Let's keep telling these truths together.